977 days ago, he lost his life. He lost his life when Bill Zelenski put a shotgun, double-barreled, in his armpit and pulled the trigger. Dr. Kovacs testified that the shotgun blast at that close range caused Riley's death, tore open the bottom of his heart, his aorta. Dr. Kovacs opined that he had maybe 10 or 15 seconds of life after that blast. We know Bill Zelenski pulled the trigger and shot Riley. He called 911 and he said, Riley Menente was walking home. I confronted him. He came at me and I shot him. Throughout the investigation, he claimed it was self-defense, except that Riley Menente Powell did not have a gun. He did not have a knife. He did not have a baseball bat. He had no weapons on him. He was walking home. Bill said he was walking home from the jail where he had been transported because he owed money on a New London fine, municipal court. An intentional homicide requires that the defendant cause the death with the intent to kill. But if you listen to the judge's instructions, it doesn't mean that on the morning of October 19th, Bill intended to kill Riley. I don't believe that. I don't think any of you believe that. It doesn't mean that when he drove to Mill Street, or was started to drive to Mill Street, that he thought, I'm going to go to Mill Street and kill Riley Menente Powell. Of course not. But as the judge instructed you, that intent to kill can be formed in an instant. And I submit to you that when you pull the trigger of a double-barreled 12-gauge shotgun, which you've already pulled back the hammers, that is intent to kill. It's also in the instructions that intent to kill is the mental purpose to take the life or was aware that his conduct was practically certain to cause the death. Anybody experienced in firearms, you don't have to be experienced in firearms to know that if you put a shotgun against the person and press into them downward and pull the trigger, that it's practically certain they're going to die. Now that's the information we knew back on October 19, 2020, 977 days ago. As of June 19th, 2023, at the beginning of this trial, he wants you to believe that pulling the trigger was an accident. It was Riley's fault. He didn't tell the dispatcher it was an accident. He didn't tell Tiffany Powell it was an accident, Riley's own mother. He didn't tell Tara Dalrymple it was an accident when she was at the scene screaming, "Why did you do this?" In fact, he said, "He came at me, I had no choice." Does that sound like an accident? 977 days later, it's an accident. But it wasn't an accident on October 19, 2020. He didn't tell any of the officers who arrived on scene that it was an accident. He didn't tell Officer Wasrud, Shabilsky, Deputy Thorpe. He told no one until this week. He had 977 days to come up with the accident scenario. That was 977 days that Riley didn't have. Now, he testified yesterday on how he was terrified of Riley. But he also testified about all of his police training, that once or twice a month he'd come across hostile subjects. He talked about how he was learned to de-escalate situations. He learned how to control a subject, how to place somebody under arrest. So when it's convenient for him, he draws on this police training that at the time he hadn't used in over 15 years when he was separated from the city of Waupaca. But when it's not convenient for him, all thoughts of his police training go out the window. He told you that it was self-defense because he was so terrified of Riley. He told you that he turned down Van Street because he had to go tell Tara not to give a ride. All he talked about to everyone was that I need to get the animals back. I need to make sure they're safe. We saw a lot about the timeline that was being prepared here. Please wait. And very familiar with this timeline after this week. But I made an addition to this timeline. Something, can you do it? That's better.
Your Honor, may we approach?
Sure. We are on the record outside the presence of the jury. Mr. Hogan, I take it you're objecting. It says Bill learns location of reptiles.
Specifically, the objection is to the 10:15 and 28 seconds p.m. That was not testified to at all.
Your Honor, that's math. There was testimony at 10:17:45. Bill's call with Danielle ends. We played the call. At the moment that on the call they gave the address of the reptiles, the testimony was there was 2 minutes and 17 seconds left on that phone call. 2 minutes and 17 seconds subtracted from 10:17:45 equals 10:15:28. It's math.
Mr. Hogan.
Your Honor, my recollection of the testimony was when that phone call started and the time in which on the recording there was. I don't recall any testimony of anybody indicating a particular amount of time left in the phone call.
That was the purpose of that testimony, was to identify the exact time that they knew the animal's location. It was the purpose of the phone call that we played. And at the time that Mr. Szilagyi stopped the recording, we put into the record how much time was left. It was for exactly this purpose. I know I didn't do the math, but I don't believe math is a fact that can't be presented. In fact, I have my slip here where I was going.
This is argument, I'm going to allow it, and you're certainly free to argue. That's not what the evidence is. You know, it's an interpretation of evidence, so I'm going to allow it.
Can they fit by there?
Please be seated. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. So as I was saying, at 10:15 and 28, or 10:15 and 28 seconds is when Bill and Tiffany learned the location of the reptiles. And where does that number come from? We played that call. And if you recall, we stopped as soon as she gave the address out on Highway 10. And the second that she ended it, that she said the address, we had 2 minutes and 17 seconds left on that call. On Mr. Hogan's exhibit, we know that the call ended at 10:17:45. 10:17:45 minus 2 minutes and 17 seconds is 10:15. So because we're using this timeline throughout this trial, Bill parked in front of Tara's house at 10:17 and 26 seconds. Van Street is 400 feet long. He had almost 2 full minutes where he's driving down School Street that he knew where the location of the animals were. He knew exactly where they were. And everything he told you is that's what is most important. Now, this week, he wants you to believe that after seeing Riley walking, he turned down Van Street because he had to tell Tara, make sure you don't give him a ride. One of the discussions you're going to have when you go back into the jury room is what if his testimony is reasonable? To say that he would stop, and not only stop, but park out on the road instead of just driving in next to her door, hopping out saying, don't give Riley a ride, hop back in and go get your animals. No, he's going to park out on the street when he just saw Riley. He's going to park out on the street, and he's going to walk down her driveway because he said the door they use is at the back. And he told you the reason for that was he was afraid he was going to get parked in. At 10:17 at night, Monday night, school night, he's afraid he's going to get parked in. Well, at that point, if you're that desperate for your animals, drive across the lawn. He's afraid he's going to get parked in, so he parks on the street. And now he tells you, or then he told you, that he saw Riley running around the corner from School Street onto Van Street. And again, 400 feet long, 6 houses. Tara's house is on here. We also have the house with the Ring camera, and we have the Bricko's house. We know those houses. Somewhere in the area of the video starting, I believe it was somewhere back here. I couldn't see the stick figure he wrote, but he saw Riley running. Now, Bill testified he had gotten out of his car and was walking up Tara's driveway to tell her, don't give Riley a ride. And he saw Riley running down the street at him, shouting, I'm gonna get you, you MF. I'm gonna beat your ass. And that caused him such terror that he went back down the driveway to his car, grabbed a stun gun, grabbed a double-barreled shotgun, opened the double-barreled shotgun, loaded it, closed it, and pulled the hammers back, which is essentially taking off any safety. Ready to fire. Common sense, logic. If Riley's running down this road and he sees him even a third of the way down the road, though he said he saw him at the corner, but the picture the defense put up, it was pitch black. Even if he saw him at the corner, by the time Bill got back, could hear what Riley was supposedly yelling at him, loaded his gun, and then met Riley. He met him right in front of the house with the doorbell camera. So all of this takes place right out here. Riley would have been at the car long before he ever got a gun out. And how do we explain that on the doorbell cam, Riley's standing there? Now the timing that makes sense is that Riley's walking down the street and he sees his mother and her boyfriend pull down the road. And all the testimony is Riley spends a lot of time with his mother and Bill. He's been in their car. They had already confronted him about the thefts and he was offended, but he said he didn't steal. There's no indication that he was afraid of Bill. So he's walking down the street. And the evidence is, according to Google Maps, it takes about 2 minutes to walk down the street. So where would he be after a minute? Bill parks in front of Tara's house at 10:17, and they're arguing at 10:18. 1 minute and 4 seconds. So what happened in that 1 minute and 4 seconds? I can guarantee you if Riley was running full blast, he would have been at the car. He wouldn't have only been halfway down the street. But if he was walking, he would have been halfway down the street. He's going to see what his mom and Bill are up to. Perfectly reasonable. And now Bill wants you to say that he was allowed to use self-defense because Riley was yelling at him that he was going to beat his ass. And that caused him such terror that he believed he was going to die. Because as the judge read the instructions, the only way he gets to use deadly force is if he believes he is going to die. And there has to be an unlawful interference with Bill. So as Riley's walking down the street, what unlawful interference? You know where the unlawful interference is on Riley. He's walking down the street. You see him stop. You see Bill and Tiffany come to him, not the other way around. Bill comes to him. And you know, when I think about this case after hearing the testimony, did Tiffany know that the hammers were pulled back? Did Tiffany know when she lifted the gun and it was pointed at her son's head that the slightest pull on one of those triggers and he would have been dead? Anybody, common sense, gun safety, you don't run around with a double-barreled shotgun with the hammers pulled back. That's intent. There's the only evidence that there was an unlawful interference on Bill is his self-serving testimony this week that he had 977 days to come up with. Riley runs away from Bill. And when you talk about self-defense, don't forget that Riley had the right to defend himself. Just because he's the 18-year-old kid and it's the adult who has the gun doesn't mean he doesn't have the right to defend himself. The judge talked to you about provocation. And as he starts to read it, it gets pretty confusing. So I wanted to pull that up. I believe Bill Zelenski provoked any attack Riley did on Bill. Riley is standing on the street, according to the doorbell video. Bill confronts him. Bill told the 911 operator he confronted him. Bill confronted him and is trying to get him with the taser. Now remember Rowan? Rowan told you that before Bill left the house on East Road, he said, "I'm going to tase," and handcuffed Riley. So while Bill tells you his biggest concern was the animals, I think his biggest concern was taking Riley into custody, because during that whole week, he was acting as a cop. He was investigating the crime. It was going to be solved on the street. He was interviewing people. He was emailing and texting everybody he knew to be on the lookout. And that night, he decided he was going to arrest Riley. That's what the evidence is. That's what shows on the video. Except he's not a law enforcement officer. He was separated from the force 15 years earlier. He didn't have training, and he didn't have the right. He did not have the right to handcuff Riley. He did not have the right to attack him and tase him. He did not have the right to point a firearm at him, much less pull the trigger and kill him. He did not have that right. In the confrontation, Riley never armed himself. All those weapons, that's how Bill drove around Wapaka, with all those weapons in the car. But we heard from Detective Rodans where those weapons were. There was another gun in the trunk. We saw Riley didn't go in the trunk. There were knives in the back seat, baseball bat in the back seat, whatever this garden tool is, in the back seat, a hammer. Riley went to the door of the car. He didn't get in. And as you saw, there weren't weapons within reach. And Bill was right there watching him. And Bill took the gun back from Tiffany. Now remember, he testified the hammers were pulled back. If the attack, which follows Bill's provocation, attacking Riley, if for some reason after that Bill reasonably believed that he was in imminent danger of death or great bodily harm, he may lawfully act in self-defense. But the person may not use or threaten force intended or likely to cause death unless he has exhausted every other reasonable means to escape. And that's Bill has to exhaust every other reasonable means of escape. What means did he have? Well, he could have driven away. The car was running, the doors were open. He could have just driven away. He told you he was afraid the car would stall. Anybody who's driven a stick shift, what happens if the car stalls? You start it up again. You close the windows, you lock the doors. What's going to happen to him in the car? What could unarmed Riley do to him if he's in the car? And if it stalls, just start it again. He could have run to Tara's house. He could have just honked the horn. If he just honked the horn and stayed on the horn, that would have gotten the attention of every neighbor. He could have locked the gun in the car. His fear was that Riley was going to get the gun from him and use it on him. And he said, I knew I'd be dead. Well, lock the gun in the car. Because Riley wanting to punch him in the face is not a reason to shoot him. It is not a reason to kill him. And Riley saying, 18-year-old kid, put the gun down and fight like a man. Sounds like an 18-year-old kid. An 18-year-old kid who says put the gun down and fight like a man, that causes a former police officer such terror that he has to shoot him, that he has to have a loaded gun with the hammers pulled back, ready to fire. It's absurd. There was just about a minute between the end of the video that showed the confrontation and the 911 call. So we don't know what happened in that minute. Tiffany said Riley never grabbed the gun. But you know what? It was pressed onto his skin. And you know what? If he grabbed the gun and tried to get it away from him, he has that right. He absolutely has that right. He has the right not to die. And think about Bill's explanation of the shooting and how it was Riley's fault. Well, for one, he's experienced in firearms. You don't put your finger in the trigger. He did it because he was so terrified. Because Riley was trying to get the gun from him, he put his finger in the trigger. Well, if you're going back and forth, guess what? You're going to pull the trigger. That doesn't make it Riley's fault. But when you think about the wound that's almost under his armpit. Melissa, close your eyes, please. It is almost to his armpit. And as, I'm going to take it off now. It's off. His armpit. Riley's pulling the gun in there with two hands. One on the foregrip, one on the barrel, conveniently where DNA was found. Yeah, I believe. But this is what you would do. You wouldn't go like this. That makes no sense whatsoever. And he would have had to been leaning in because it was a downward trajectory. Bill and Riley are the same height. So he would have had to been down and leaning in. The gun would have had to been elevated. Two hands on it. That story makes no sense. We don't know what happened, but we know that didn't happen. Because you would go like this. Bill motioned on the stand that he was going like this. But that makes no sense because it's nowhere near there. Bill's story makes no sense. Timing is so far off. The fact that he was terrified for his life because Riley yelled, "I want to beat your ass." And then he tried to tell you why he was so terrified of Riley. Now, we acknowledge there was a domestic incident in February. And if everybody who has a domestic incident in Wapaka County could be hunted down with a shotgun, we'd have much lower population. They're not good, but they happen. But to think that a domestic incident in February means that Bill Zelenski is terrified of Riley in October? And every other incident that Bill talked about was Bill's own testimony. But he did testify Riley had never hit him, ever. They did verbal sparring. 18-year-old, I'm going to get you. Big man. Probably didn't like Bill. Probably would have wished his mother wasn't his girlfriend. Never testified Riley said he was going to kill him. Never testified that there was anything that would have caused him such terror. And you remember when he was talking to Officer Wasru downtown? And he's talking about, the fight they had before the animals disappeared. No fear. There was no fear in his voice whatsoever. Wouldn't that be the time that it would have shown? Wouldn't it have shown in the 911 call? See, there again, he wants you to believe his police training made him so calm that he could just say, Riley was walking home, I confronted him, he came at me and I shot him. He doesn't say, he tried to grab the gun from me. Nope, he came at me and I shot him. Calm, Tiffany's calm. The one you hear is Tara, who's hysterical. The father of her grandchild is laying there and no one's helping him. And let's talk about police training. CPR, stop the bleeding, roll him over and see if he's alive. Nothing, not a thing, not a bit of aid was rendered to that poor boy. And now they want you to rule, to judge his actions and his statements and say it was all reasonable. His terror was reasonable. Well, there was no sign of that terror 977 days ago. Not a sign. Not till this week. The judge gave you instructions on credibility of witnesses. Do they have a reason to lie? Well, does he have a reason to lie? He shot someone in cold blood and killed him. Does he have a reason to lie? Mariah Bricko testified when she was looking out the window, she heard, "Stop or I'll shoot you." And then pow. That is an intentional homicide. That is not an accident. That is not self-defense. That is an intentional homicide. And to think that it was Riley who said that makes no sense. Riley never had a gun. The person with the gun was Bill Zelenski. Stop or I'll shoot you. And he did. And at the end of your deliberations, I'm asking you to find Bill Zelenski guilty of first-degree intentional homicide in taking the life of an 18-year-old boy. Thank you.